The Lighthouse Keeper's Vigil. On a rocky coast where the sea meets jagged cliffs and fog rolls in like whispered secrets, there stands a lighthouse that has guided ships safely home for over 200 years. The locals call it Beacon's End, and they say that on certain misty nights, if you look up at the lamp room, you can still see the lighthouse keeper tending his light. This would be unremarkable except that the lighthouse has been automated for 30 years, and the last keeper died long before that. But this is not a story about fear. This is a story about duty, about love, and about the quiet dignity of a soul who simply refused to leave his post. Let me tell you about Samuel Whitmore and the vigil he has kept for more than a century. Samuel became the lighthouse keeper of Beacon's End in 1887, when he was just 23 years old. He was a quiet man, thoughtful and serious, with eyes the color of the sea he watched over. The lighthouse stood on a small rocky island, connected to the mainland only by a narrow causeway that disappeared beneath the waves at high tide. It was lonely work, isolated work, the kind of position that drove some men mad with solitude. But Samuel loved it. He loved the rhythm of the tides, the cry of the gulls, the way the light cut through darkness to guide lost ships safely past the rocks. Every evening as the sun set, he would climb the 112 steps to the lamp room and light the great beacon. Every morning he would extinguish it and begin the careful maintenance that kept the light burning true. For 3 years, Samuel lived this solitary existence, content with his books, his duties, and the endless conversation of the sea. Then one autumn afternoon, a young woman appeared on the causeway during low tide, carrying a basket and wearing a practical gray dress. Her name was Eleanor, and she was the niece of the supply merchant who brought provisions to the lighthouse once a month. She'd come to deliver extra lamp oil her uncle had forgotten, and she'd insisted on bringing it herself because, as she told Samuel with a slight smile, she was curious about the strange man who lived alone with the sea. They talked for 2 hours until the rising tide forced her to leave. Samuel, who had grown accustomed to silence, found that he remembered how to speak, how to laugh, how to feel the simple joy of human connection. Eleanor came back. Not every day, the tides and her own work made that impossible. But once a week, then twice, then whenever the tide and weather allowed. They walked the rocky shore together, collected shells, talked about everything and nothing. Samuel showed her the lighthouse, taught her how the great lens worked, how the light was kept burning through the darkest storms. They fell in love the way the tide rises, gradually, inevitably, as natural as the turning of the earth. They married in the spring of 1891, and Eleanor moved into the lighthouse keeper's cottage. For the first time in his life, Samuel understood what it meant to be truly happy. The lighthouse was no longer a solitary vigil but a home filled with warmth, with laughter, with the quiet comfort of companionship. Eleanor learned the lighthouse as well as Samuel knew it. She could trim the wicks, polish the brass, keep the lamp room spotless. On stormy nights they would climb to the light together, watching the beam cut through rain and fog, knowing that somewhere out on the dark water, sailors were seeing that light and feeling safe. "We save lives here," Eleanor told him once as they stood in the lamp room during a fierce nor'easter. "Every night that light burns, we're telling people lost in the dark, you're not alone. Keep going. There's safe harbor ahead." Samuel never forgot those words. They had 7 years together. 7 perfect years of shared duty and deep love. Then in the winter of 1898, Eleanor fell ill. It started as a simple cough, but it settled into her lungs and wouldn't leave. The doctor from the mainland came when the tides allowed, but there was little he could do. "Pneumonia," he said gravely. "Keep her warm. Keep her comfortable. Pray." Samuel did all of these things. But Eleanor grew weaker with each passing day. On the night she died, a terrible storm raged outside, the kind of storm that sent ships desperately seeking the safety of the harbor. Eleanor lay in their bed, her breathing shallow, her hand cold in Samuel's. "The light," she whispered. "Samuel, you need to tend the light." "I'm not leaving you," he said, tears streaming down his face. "The sailors," she insisted, using what little strength she had left. "They need the light. They need to find their way home." He squeezed his hand. "Promise me. No matter what happens, keep the light burning. Save them." "I promise." Eleanor smiled, closed her eyes, and was gone. Samuel sat with her for just a moment. One moment to say goodbye to the love of his life, to feel the full weight of his grief. Then, because he had made a promise, he stood. He climbed the 112 steps to the lamp room. He checked the oil, trimmed the wick, ensured the great light was burning at its brightest. All through that terrible storm, Samuel kept his vigil. Ships found their way safely past the rocks. Lives were saved. And when dawn finally came, Samuel descended the stairs, buried his wife in the small cemetery on the island, and continued his duty. For 42 more years, Samuel Whitmore kept the light at Beacon's End. He never remarried. He never left his post. He tended the light every single night, even as he grew old, even as his joints ached and his eyes dimmed. The lighthouse was his purpose, his promise to Eleanor, his way of honoring her memory. Samuel died in 1940 at the age of 76, found peacefully in his chair in the lamp room, the light burning faithfully behind him. The lighthouse continued operating with new keepers coming and going over the years. But they all reported the same strange occurrences. On stormy nights they would hear footsteps on the stairs, 112 steps climbing steadily upward. The lamp would be found perfectly maintained in the morning, even when the keeper swore they'd left it needing attention. And sometimes, just sometimes, they would glimpse a figure in the lamp room. A tall, serious man with sea-colored eyes, checking the oil, trimming the wick, ensuring the light burned true. The phenomenon became so well known that when the lighthouse was finally automated in 1963, the workers installing the new equipment reported seeing Samuel themselves. Not frightening them, not interfering with their work. Just watching, making sure they did it properly, ensuring that the light would continue to burn even without a living keeper. Sarah Chin first heard about Samuel Whitmore when she was researching for her graduate thesis on American lighthouse history. The stories intrigued her, not because she believed in ghosts, but because she was fascinated by the dedication of lighthouse keepers, by the idea that someone could be so devoted to a duty that it defined their entire existence. She visited Beacon's End on a gray October afternoon, 30 years after automation, 60 years after Samuel's death. The lighthouse still stood tall and proud, its lights still burning every night, though now controlled by sensors and timers rather than human hands. Sarah climbed the 112 steps, counting each one, imagining Samuel making this journey twice daily for 45 years. The lamp room was empty, automated equipment humming quietly. She spent an hour photographing, taking notes, absorbing the atmosphere. As evening approached and the automated light began to glow, Sarah found herself reluctant to leave. There was something peaceful about this place, something that felt almost alive with purpose. "You really loved this, didn't you?" she found herself saying aloud, addressing the ghost she didn't quite believe in. "You and Eleanor. This wasn't just a job. It was a calling." The air seemed to shift slightly. Not frighteningly, but like a gentle acknowledgement. Sarah felt suddenly, inexplicably certain that she wasn't alone, and that whoever was with her meant no harm. She came back the next day, and the next. Her thesis research became an obsession, became a book project. She interviewed elderly locals who remembered the stories their grandparents told about Samuel and Eleanor. She found the lighthouse logs Samuel had kept, his meticulous handwriting recording weather, ships sighted, maintenance performed. And she began spending nights in the lighthouse, despite the protests of the historical society that maintained it. She wanted to understand what had made Samuel stay, both in life and after death. On the 7th night, as a storm rolled in from the sea, Sarah was sitting in the lamp room, reading one of Samuel's old logs by lamplight, when she heard it clearly: footsteps on the stairs. 112 steps climbing steadily upward. She should have been frightened. Instead, she felt calm. Curious. She set down the log and waited. The footsteps reached the lamp room. The door didn't open, it didn't need to. But Sarah felt a presence enter the room, felt the air change in the way it does when you're no longer alone. "Hello, Samuel," she said quietly. The lamp flickered slightly. Then, in the reflection of the great lens, Sarah saw him. Not clearly, not solidly, but unmistakably there. A tall man with kind eyes, wearing the simple clothes of a 19th-century lighthouse keeper. He was checking the light, his movements practiced and gentle, the actions of someone who had performed this duty so many thousands of times that it was as natural as breathing. "You're still keeping your promise," Sarah said. "After all these years, you're still keeping the light burning for Eleanor." The figure paused, turned toward her. And Sarah felt such a wave of gentle sadness and steadfast devotion that tears sprang to her eyes. She understood then. This wasn't about being unable to move on. This wasn't about being trapped. Samuel Whitmore stayed because he chose to stay. Because his promise to Eleanor, to keep the light burning, to guide the lost safely home, wasn't bound by something as simple as death. His love for her, his dedication to their shared purpose, was stronger than the boundary between life and whatever came after. "It's okay," Sarah whispered. "The light still burns. You've kept your promise." Eleanor would be so proud. The figure seemed to solidify slightly, and for just a moment, Sarah could see him clearly. Samuel Whitmore, not as he had been at 76 when he died, but as he had been in his prime, strong and devoted and purposeful. And beside him, visible for just a heartbeat, stood a woman in a gray dress with gentle eyes. Eleanor. They were together. They had always been together. And they were keeping their vigil not out of obligation or inability to rest, but out of love, for each other, for the lighthouse, for the idea that even in darkness, there should always be light to guide you home. The vision faded. The lamp room was empty again except for Sarah. But the light burned steady and true, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty, that it always would. Because some promises are too powerful to be broken by something as inconsequential as death. She wrote her book. It became quite famous in certain circles. A thoughtful, lyrical exploration of lighthouse keeping, of duty and devotion, of the idea that love can anchor you to a place so strongly that you become part of it forever. She titled it The Eternal Vigil, and dedicated it to Samuel and Eleanor Whitmore. Sarah visited Beacon's End regularly for the rest of her life. She never saw Samuel and Eleanor again, not clearly. But on stormy nights, when she climbed to the lamp room, she would feel their presence like a gentle hand on her shoulder. A reminder that she wasn't alone. That somewhere in the dark there was always light. And the light still burns. Every night, as it has for over 200 years, the great beacon at Beacon's End cuts through the darkness. Automated equipment keeps it running, yes. But the locals know the truth. Samuel Whitmore is still keeping his vigil. Still honoring his promise. Still ensuring that no ship, no soul, no one lost in darkness will be without light to guide them safely home. And Eleanor stands beside him as she always has, as she always will. Some ghosts don't haunt. They watch over. They protect. They love so deeply that death becomes just another storm to weather together, another darkness through which to shine their light. Rest now, dear listener. Let the image of that steady light comfort you. Imagine Samuel and Eleanor, together in their lamp room, keeping their eternal vigil not out of sorrow but out of love. Know that even in the darkest night, there are those who keep lights burning to guide you home. Sleep peacefully. The light still burns. It always will. Narrator. And so begins our journey through the quiet, gentle world of ghosts who remain not to frighten, but to fulfill purposes larger than death itself. Samuel and Eleanor watch over their lighthouse still, a reminder that love and duty can transcend the boundaries between worlds. But theirs is not the only vigil. There are other ghosts, other purposes, other stories waiting to be told. Stories of those who stayed behind not because they couldn't leave, but because they chose to remain. In our next tale, we'll meet another soul who found that death was not an ending, but a transformation. A chance to continue caring for what mattered most in life. But for now, rest. Let the rhythm of the waves and the steady beam of the lighthouse lull you toward sleep. Tomorrow brings new stories, but tonight you are safe. The light is burning. All is well. The Librarian's Collection. In the heart of the old city, on a quiet street where gas lamps still flicker in the evening and cobblestones remember the footsteps of centuries, there stands a library that has served the community for over 150 years. The Carnegie Memorial Library, built in 1872 with funds from the great philanthropist himself, is a beautiful building of red brick and carved stone, with tall windows that let in the golden afternoon light. The library is still open, still serving readers, still filled with the musty sweet smell of old books and the whisper of turning pages. But the staff and regular patrons know something that casual visitors don't. Miss Evelyn Hartwell, the head librarian who served the library for 43 years, never really left. And if you're very lucky, she might help you find exactly the book you need. Evelyn Hartwell became the Carnegie Memorial Library's head librarian in 1923, when she was just 28 years old. It was unusual for a woman to hold such a position then, particularly one so young, but Evelyn had proven herself exceptional. She knew the Dewey Decimal System better than anyone. She could locate any book in the collection with barely a glance at the catalog. And she had an uncanny ability to know exactly what book a patron needed. Not what they asked for, but what they truly needed. Books find their readers, she would say, a slight smile on her serious face. My job is simply to facilitate the introduction. Evelyn was small and slight, always dressed in simple but elegant clothes, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She spoke quietly, moved through the library like a whisper, and had an intensity about her that made even the rowdiest children fall silent when she looked at them. Not from fear but from respect. Miss Hartwell clearly loved her library and her books with a devotion that commanded reverence. She never married. The library was her family, the books her children, the readers her purpose. She lived in a small apartment 3 blocks away, walked to work every morning at precisely 8 o'clock, and often stayed until well past closing, cataloging new arrivals or repairing damaged volumes with careful, gentle hands. For 43 years, Evelyn tended the library. She weathered the Depression by fighting to keep the library open when the city council wanted to close it. She weathered World War II by creating a program that sent books to local soldiers overseas. She weathered the changing times, the advent of television, the claims that libraries were becoming obsolete. Through it all, she remained steadfast, certain that books mattered, that libraries were sanctuaries, that knowledge and stories were treasures worth preserving. In 1966, at the age of 71, Evelyn Hartwell died. She was found one morning, seated at her desk in the library's back office, a book open in her lap. She had come in early as she always did, and her heart had simply stopped. The book in her lap was a collection of Emily Dickinson's poetry, opened to the poem that begins, "Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me." The library staff mourned her deeply. The regular patrons grieved. The city held a memorial service, and dozens of people whose lives had been touched by Evelyn and her perfect book recommendations came to pay their respects. But 3 days after her funeral, something strange happened. Mrs. Kowalski, a patron who had been visiting the library weekly for 30 years, came in looking for a book. She couldn't remember the title or author, only that it was about gardens and had a green cover. The young librarian at the desk tried to help but was overwhelmed. The library had hundreds of books about gardens. As Mrs. Kowalski wandered the stacks, growing increasingly frustrated, a book suddenly fell from a high shelf, landing open at her feet. It was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, a green-covered edition about gardens, and though Mrs. Kowalski hadn't realized it, exactly the book she needed. She'd been grieving the recent death of her own sister, and the story of healing and renewal was precisely what her heart required. As Mrs. Kowalski picked up the book, she could have sworn she smelled Evelyn's perfume, a light scent of lavender and old paper. And she heard very faintly a familiar quiet voice saying, "Books find their readers, dear." Over the following weeks and months, similar incidents occurred with increasing frequency. Books would fall from shelves, landing open to exactly the right page. Patrons would find volumes sitting on tables, perfectly suited to problems they hadn't even articulated. The card catalog drawers would open on their own, revealing exactly the entry someone needed. The library staff began to whisper. Miss Hartwell was still at her post, still helping readers find their books, still facilitating those crucial introductions between books and the people who needed them. Some of the staff found this unsettling, but most found it comforting. Evelyn had loved the library so much in life, why shouldn't she continue caring for it in death? The phenomenon continued for years. The library modernized, installed computers, converted to a digital catalog, added new sections for audiobooks and DVDs. But through all the changes, Miss Hartwell's presence remained. Books still found their readers in impossible ways. And the library felt watched over, protected, loved. Marcus Chin first encountered Miss Hartwell when he was 8 years old in 1985, nearly 20 years after her death. He'd come to the library with his mother, a recent immigrant who was struggling to learn English. Marcus, born in America but speaking Cantonese at home, was caught between two worlds, not quite fitting in at school, not quite understanding his parents' old country ways. While his mother attended an ESL class in the library's basement, Marcus wandered the children's section, feeling lost and lonely. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He just wanted to escape for a while. A book fell from the shelf and hit him gently on the head. Not hard enough to hurt, just enough to get his attention. He picked it up, The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster. He'd never heard of it, but something made him sit down right there on the floor and begin reading. 2 hours later, when his mother came to collect him, Marcus was transported. The book spoke to him in ways nothing ever had. It was about a bored boy who found a magical kingdom, about the importance of words and numbers, about discovering that the world was more wonderful than it seemed. "Can I check this out?" Marcus asked the librarian at the desk. "Of course, dear," the elderly librarian said with a knowing smile. "Miss Hartwell has excellent taste, doesn't she?" Marcus didn't understand what she meant then. But he kept the book for 2 weeks, read it 3 times, and when he returned it, another book was waiting for him on the return cart. A Wrinkle in Time. Then The Chronicles of Narnia. Then The Giver. Each one perfectly suited to what Marcus needed at that moment in his life, each one helping him understand himself a little better. He began to realize that the books weren't random. Something, was curating them specifically for him. When he struggled with anger at being teased at school, Ender's Game appeared. When he felt caught between cultures, American-born Chinese materialized. When he lost his grandfather and couldn't process the grief, Bridge to Terabithia was sitting on his usual table. By the time Marcus was 12, he knew about Miss Hartwell. The library staff had told him the stories. And he believed absolutely that the ghost of the former head librarian was guiding his reading, helping him grow, using books to teach him what he needed to learn. "Thank you," he whispered sometimes alone in the stacks. "Thank you for the books." He never received an audible answer. But books continued to find him, and he always felt a warm presence, like a kind grandmother watching over him with approval. Marcus grew up visiting the library weekly, then daily. He volunteered there as a teenager, shelving books and helping patrons. He went to college and studied library science, inspired by Miss Hartwell's dedication. And when he graduated with his master's degree in library and information science, he applied for a position at the Carnegie Memorial Library. He was hired immediately. The current head librarian, a woman named Patricia who'd worked with Evelyn briefly before her death, smiled when she saw his application. "Miss Hartwell has been preparing you for this for years," Patricia said. "Welcome home." Marcus worked at the library for 5 years, learning its systems, getting to know the collection, serving the community. He experienced Miss Hartwell's presence regularly, books moving on their own, the scent of lavender appearing unexpectedly, the sense of gentle approval when he helped a patron find exactly the right book. Then Patricia retired, and at age 31, Marcus became head librarian of the Carnegie Memorial Library. The youngest person to hold the position since Evelyn herself. On his first day in the head librarian's office, the same office where Evelyn had died, still containing much of her original furniture, Marcus found a note waiting for him on the desk. It was written in old-fashioned script on yellowed paper. "Welcome, dear boy. The library is in good hands. Take care of the books and they will take care of the readers. That is all that matters." Marcus's hands trembled as he held the note. Miss Hartwell had left him a message, or rather had left it years ago, somehow knowing he would one day sit at this desk. "I'll take care of them," he promised aloud. "I'll take care of everything just like you did." A book fell from the shelf behind him, a light, gentle drop. He turned to see what it was. A collection of poems by Emily Dickinson, opened to Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Marcus smiled through his tears. Miss Hartwell was still there. Still watching. Still caring for the library she'd never truly left. Over the following years, Marcus ran the library with the same dedication Evelyn had shown. He fought budget cuts. He modernized while preserving the library's historic character. He created programs for immigrants, for struggling students, for elderly patrons who were lonely and just needed a place where they were welcomed. And through it all, Miss Hartwell's presence continued. She helped Marcus in countless small ways, guiding him toward books that would help with difficult decisions, ensuring that the right patrons found the right resources at the right time, protecting the library through her quiet, persistent watchfulness. One winter evening, as Marcus was closing the library, he heard footsteps in the stacks. Distinct, purposeful footsteps, though he knew he was alone in the building. He followed the sound to the history section and found a single book lying on the floor, open to a specific page. It was a history of the library itself, open to a photograph from 1925. There stood Evelyn Hartwell, young and serious, surrounded by children at a reading hour. The caption read, Head librarian Evelyn Hartwell believed that libraries existed not just to house books, but to change lives. "Every book is a door," she once said. "My job is to help people find the door they need to walk through." Marcus sat down on the floor holding the book and spoke to the empty air. "You're still doing that, aren't you? Still helping people find their doors. Still changing lives." The air seemed to shift and Marcus felt that familiar warm presence, stronger than usual, more distinct. For just a moment he could have sworn he saw her. A small, slight woman in old-fashioned dress, standing among the shelves with a look of deep satisfaction on her face. "The library is more than books," her voice seemed to whisper, though Marcus couldn't be sure if he heard it or simply felt it in his heart. "It's sanctuary. It's hope. It's proof that knowledge and stories can outlive us, can touch lives we'll never meet, can change the world one reader at a time. That's worth staying for. That's worth protecting." The vision faded but the warmth remained. And Marcus understood. Evelyn hadn't stayed because she was trapped or confused. She stayed because her work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. There would always be readers who needed guidance, books that needed protecting, lives that needed changing. And she would be there for all of it, keeping her eternal watch over the library she loved. Years passed. Marcus grew older, became a respected figure in the library community, trained new librarians in the traditions Evelyn had established. The Carnegie Memorial Library thrived under his care, and Miss Hartwell's presence remained a constant, gentle, helpful, protective. When Marcus was 53, a young woman came into the library looking lost and overwhelmed. She was a graduate student researching local history, and she couldn't find a particular book of old city records that she desperately needed for her thesis. Marcus helped her search the catalog, but the book wasn't listed. It should have been in the collection. He remembered seeing it years ago, but it had apparently been lost or misfiled. As they stood discussing where else she might find the information, a book fell from a high shelf in the local history section. Not the book she'd been looking for, but something else. A journal, old and leather-bound, that Marcus had never seen before. The graduate student opened it and gasped. It was a personal diary kept by one of the city's founding families, a primary source that historians had thought lost. It contained exactly the information she needed and more. "How did you know this was here?" she asked Marcus, amazed. "I didn't," Marcus admitted, looking up at the shelves with a smile. "But Miss Hartwell did." He told the graduate student about Evelyn Hartwell, about the librarian who had never left her post, about the gentle ghost who still helped readers find their books. The young woman listened with wonder, and when she left that evening with the journal carefully checked out, she paused at the door. "Thank you, Miss Hartwell," she said quietly. "Thank you for helping me find what I needed." The lights flickered once, gently, in acknowledgement. Narrator. And so Evelyn Hartwell continues her vigil in the Carnegie Memorial Library, matching books to readers, protecting knowledge, ensuring that no one who truly needs a story leaves without finding it. She remains not out of sorrow or regret, but out of pure, devoted love for the library that was her life's work. Like Samuel and Eleanor at their lighthouse, Evelyn found that death was simply another chapter, not an ending. Her purpose, to facilitate the sacred introduction between books and their readers, transcended the boundary between life and death. The library still stands. The books still find their readers. And Miss Hartwell still watches over it all, a gentle presence in the stacks, ensuring that her life's work continues long after life itself has ended. Rest now, dear listener. Imagine the quiet sanctuary of that library, the peaceful rustle of pages, the gentle guidance of a devoted soul who ensures that knowledge and stories continue to change lives. Know that even in death, purpose can persist and love can keep watch over what matters most. Sleep peacefully. The books are being tended. All is well. The Conductor's Last Symphony. In the grand concert hall of the Riverside Philharmonic, where gilded ceilings soar above velvet seats and the ghosts of 1,000 performances linger in the air, there is a conductor's podium that has stood empty for 70 years. Empty to most eyes, at least. But the musicians know better. On certain rehearsal evenings, when the light falls just right through the tall windows, they can see him there. Maestro Alexander Volkov, baton raised, guiding them through passages they struggle with, his face showing the same passionate concentration it held in life. He does not frighten them. He simply helps. Because Alexander Volkov dedicated his life to music, and death has proven to be only a minor interruption in that dedication. Let me tell you about the maestro who could not bear to let the music end. Alexander Volkov came to America in 1923, fleeing the chaos of revolutionary Russia with nothing but his violin, his talent, and an unshakable belief in the transformative power of music. He was 28 years old, spoke almost no English and knew no one in this strange new country. But he knew music. Music was a language that needed no translation. He found work first as a violinist in small orchestras, playing in hotel dining rooms and theater pits. But Alexander was more than a skilled musician. He was a visionary. He heard music not just as notes on a page, but as living, breathing emotion made audible. And he had an extraordinary gift for helping other musicians hear it that way too. By 1930 he had become the conductor of the Riverside Philharmonic, a struggling orchestra in a mid-sized city, performing in a beautiful but aging concert hall. The orchestra was competent but uninspired, the audiences were dwindling and the board of directors was considering dissolution. Alexander transformed everything. He didn't just conduct. He taught, he inspired, he demanded excellence while nurturing each musician's unique voice. Under his direction, the orchestra didn't just play notes. They made music that moved people to tears, that changed how audiences heard the world, that proved art could transcend language and culture and touch something universal in the human heart. Music, he would tell his musicians in his heavily accented English, is not about perfection. It's about truth. You play truth, people will hear truth. You play only notes is just sound. Play truth. For 34 years, Alexander led the Riverside Philharmonic. He never married, never seemed to want anything beyond his music and his musicians. The orchestra was his family, the concert hall his home, each performance a reason to live. He was especially devoted to the young musicians, the students and recent graduates joining the orchestra, full of talent but unsure of themselves. Alexander mentored them individually, staying late after rehearsals to work through difficult passages, writing encouraging notes, believing in them even when they didn't believe in themselves. You have gift, he would tell them. Gift is responsibility. You must share, must give to world. Music is not for keeping, is for giving away. In 1964, at the age of 69, Alexander was preparing the orchestra for what would be his final concert. A performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. It was to be the culmination of the season, a celebration of his 34th year with the orchestra. He never conducted that final concert. During the dress rehearsal, in the midst of the symphony's triumphant final movement, Alexander's baton faltered. He gripped the podium, tried to continue, then collapsed. The musicians rushed to help, but it was too late. A massive heart attack. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. The Riverside Philharmonic performed Beethoven's Ninth 3 days later as a memorial, with the assistant conductor leading and Alexander's podium standing empty, draped in black cloth. The concert hall was full, every seat taken, people standing in the aisles, all coming to honor the maestro who had given them so much beauty. As the final triumphant notes of the Ode to Joy filled the hall, more than one musician could have sworn they saw Alexander standing at his podium, baton raised, tears streaming down his face, conducting his orchestra one last time. The sightings continued. At first, the musicians dismissed them as grief, as imagination, as the mind playing tricks in moments of stress. But the phenomena were too consistent, too specific to ignore. During rehearsals, particularly when the orchestra struggled with a difficult passage, musicians would feel a presence, a gentle hand on a shoulder, a whispered suggestion in accented English, a sense of being guided toward the right interpretation. The music would suddenly click into place, as if Alexander himself had shown them how it should be played. The concertmaster, a violinist named Robert who had studied under Alexander for 15 years, was the first to speak openly about it. "He's still here," Robert announced at a rehearsal 6 months after Alexander's death. "I know how that sounds, but I don't care. Maestro Volkov is still helping us. I've felt him during every rehearsal this week, guiding us through the Brahms. And I think we should acknowledge it, honor it, be grateful for it." Some musicians agreed immediately. Others were skeptical. But over time, as the phenomena continued, even the skeptics had to admit something unusual was happening. A young cellist struggling with a solo would find her music marked with fingerings in a handwriting she didn't recognize. Handwriting that matched Alexander's though she'd never met him. A nervous new member would feel an invisible presence during his first performance, steadying him, filling him with confidence. The orchestra would rehearse a piece they'd never played before and somehow know intuitively exactly how Alexander would have wanted it performed. The musicians began leaving small tributes on the empty podium: flowers, notes of thanks, photographs from performances they were especially proud of. The concert hall staff, cleaning late at night, reported hearing music when the building was empty, single instruments playing as if someone was practicing. And always there was the sense of being watched over, protected, loved. Emma Rodriguez joined the Riverside Philharmonic as a violinist in 1998, 34 years after Alexander's death. She was 23, fresh out of conservatory, talented but terrified. This was her first professional position and she felt desperately out of her depth. On her first day of rehearsal, the concertmaster, a different Robert now, the original long since retired, told her about Maestro Volkov. "He still watches over the orchestra," Robert said matter-of-factly. "Especially the new musicians. Don't be surprised if you feel his presence. He's benevolent, he just wants to help." Emma smiled politely, assuming this was some kind of hazing ritual for newcomers. Ghosts didn't exist, and even if they did, surely they had better things to do than attend orchestra rehearsals. But 3 weeks later, Emma was struggling. She had a solo passage in an upcoming performance of Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony. Just 8 bars, but exposed, difficult, crucial. He couldn't get it right. Her fingers stumbled. Her bow control wavered. The more she practiced, the worse it became. The night before the performance, Emma stayed late in the empty concert hall, practicing alone, fighting back tears of frustration. It was past midnight. The building was locked, the staff gone. Just Emma and her violin and the crushing certainty that she was going to fail. "I can't do this," she whispered to the empty hall. "I'm not good enough. I'm going to ruin everything." The air shifted, grew warmer, and Emma felt a presence beside her, gentle, grandfatherly, utterly calm. She should have been frightened. Instead she felt comforted. A voice spoke, not aloud but in her mind. Heavily accented, kind but firm. "You are good enough. You play too much in head, not enough in heart. Music is not problem to solve. A story to tell. What story does this music tell you?" Emma froze. She was alone in the hall. She had to be alone. But the presence was unmistakable, the voice was clear, and the question resonated in her chest like a struck bell. What story did the music tell? She closed her eyes and listened, not to the technical demands of the passage, but to the emotion underneath. Tchaikovsky's Fifth was about struggle, about darkness giving way to light, about triumph earned through suffering. This solo passage was a moment of uncertainty, of questioning, before the final resolution. Emma raised her violin and played. Not perfectly, technically she made the same mistakes as before. But differently. With feeling. With truth. She played the uncertainty, the questioning, the fear that comes before hope. The notes sang. The passage came alive. And when she finished, Emma felt tears on her face and an overwhelming sense of gentle approval surrounding her. "Yes," the voice whispered. "This is truth. Tomorrow you play this, audience will feel. You play truth." The presence faded. Emma was alone again in the empty hall. But something fundamental had shifted. She understood now. The music wasn't about perfection, it was about truth. She performed the solo the next evening flawlessly. Not because her technique had suddenly improved, but because she'd stopped worrying about technique and started feeling the music. The audience was silent afterward, moved. Her fellow musicians congratulated her. And Emma knew with absolute certainty that Maestro Volkov had been there, watching from his podium, proud. Over the following years, Emma experienced Alexander's presence regularly. Never frightening, never demanding. Just helpful. Guiding. Teaching the way he'd taught in life. Through inspiration rather than instruction. Through helping musicians find the truth in the music rather than just playing the notes correctly. She learned to leave flowers on the podium before particularly challenging performances. She learned to whisper, "Thank you, Maestro," when she felt his guidance. She learned to trust the moments when music suddenly clicked into place, understanding that Alexander was still doing what he'd always done, helping musicians find their voices. When Emma became concertmaster at age 45, she made sure every new musician learned about Maestro Volkov. Not as a ghost story but as a truth. Their hall was watched over by someone who had loved music so deeply that death couldn't end that love. One winter evening, the orchestra was preparing for a performance of Beethoven's Ninth, the same symphony Alexander had been rehearsing when he died. It was the 50th anniversary of his death, and the orchestra was dedicating the performance to his memory. The rehearsal wasn't going well. The music felt flat, lifeless. The musicians were playing correctly but without heart. The current conductor, a talented but uninspired man named Gregory, couldn't seem to kindle the fire the music needed. As they struggled through the final movement for the third time, Emma felt Alexander's presence more strongly than ever before. Not gentle this time but urgent, demanding. The music stopped mid-phrase as every light in the concert hall suddenly brightened, then dimmed, then returned to normal. The musicians looked around, startled. Did everyone feel that? Emma asked quietly. They all had. A presence, powerful and insistent, filling the hall. He's here, Robert, the current Robert, the third violinist to hold that name in the orchestra, said. Maestro Volkov is here, and he's not happy with how we're playing his Beethoven. Gregory, the conductor, looked skeptical but uncomfortable. That's ridiculous. There's no... He stopped. Because on the podium, visible to everyone now, stood the translucent figure of an elderly man in old-fashioned formal wear, baton in hand, eyes blazing with passion and frustration. Alexander Volkov, manifesting more clearly than he had in 50 years, looking at his orchestra with disappointed love. You play notes, his voice filled the hall, not audible but felt by everyone present. Just notes. Where's truth? Where's joy? Where is triumph of human spirit over darkness? Beethoven writes about this, about finding light in dark, about brotherhood of all people. You play like his exercise, not like his prayer. Gregory stumbled backward, terrified. But Emma stood up, her violin in hand, and addressed the ghost directly. Show us, maestro. Please. Show us how you want it played. Alexander's translucent form seemed to solidify slightly. He raised his baton. Again. From beginning of final movement. This time you listen not just to notes. You listen to what notes mean. You play for every person who needs hope. You play for every heart that needs light. You play truth. He brought down his baton. The orchestra played Beethoven's Ninth final movement as they had never played it before. Alexander conducted them, really conducted them the way he had in life, with passion and precision and profound understanding of every phrase's meaning. The musicians didn't just play notes. They played hope. They played triumph. They played the incredible soaring joy of the Ode to Joy, as if they'd discovered it for the first time. The music filled the hall with such power, such beauty, that several musicians wept as they played. Even Gregory, cowering near the wall, found himself moved to tears. When the final note faded, Alexander lowered his baton and looked at his orchestra with tremendous satisfaction. Now, he said quietly, his voice full of love, now you understand. Tomorrow night you play like this. You give this gift to audience. You remember, music is not for keeping. Is for giving away. His form began to fade. But before he disappeared entirely, he looked directly at Emma and smiled. You do good work taking care of my orchestra. Thank you for remembering old maestro. Thank you for keeping music alive. And then he was gone. The orchestra sat in stunned silence. Finally Robert spoke. Well, I suppose that settles the question of whether Maestro Volkov is really still here. The performance the next evening was transcendent. The audience rose to their feet before the final note had even finished resonating. Critics called it the finest performance of Beethoven's Ninth in decades. And every musician on stage knew why. They'd had the finest conductor in the world guiding them. A conductor who had loved music so much that death was merely an inconvenience, not an ending. Alexander never manifested that clearly again. But his presence remained, gentle, helpful, watching over the orchestra he had built, ensuring that music continued to be played with truth and passion. Narrator. And so Maestro Alexander Volkov keeps his eternal watch over the Riverside Philharmonic, guiding musicians toward truth in music, ensuring that performances touch hearts rather than just playing notes correctly. Like Samuel and Eleanor with their lighthouse, like Evelyn with her library, Alexander found that his life's purpose transcended death itself. Music was not something he could leave behind. It was too essential, too beautiful, too important. And so he remains, a gentle presence in the concert hall, helping musicians find their voices, teaching that perfection means nothing without truth. The orchestra still plays. The music still soars. And Maestro Volkov still conducts, his baton raised in eternal dedication to the art he loved more than life itself. Rest now, dear listener. Let the distant echo of beautiful music lull you toward sleep. Imagine the concert hall, quiet now, but still resonating with the memory of every performance, every note, every moment of transcendent beauty that has graced its stage. Sleep peacefully. The music is being tended. All is well. The baker's morning ritual. On Maple Street, in a neighborhood where old brick buildings lean against each other like tired friends and the smell of fresh bread has perfumed the morning air for generations, there stands a bakery that opens every day at precisely 6 o'clock in the morning. The bakery has been in the same location since 1891, though it's changed hands many times over the decades. The current owners, the Garcia family, have run it for the past 15 years. And they know something that their regular customers suspect but never quite speak aloud. The ovens are always warm when they arrive at 4 in the morning to begin the day's baking. The starter for the sourdough is always perfectly fed and bubbly. And sometimes, if they're very quiet and very still, they can hear someone humming an old tune in the pre-dawn darkness. A gentle, contented sound that speaks of work lovingly done. Josephine Mueller never left her bakery. And every morning in the hours before dawn, she still prepares the way for the day's bread. Let me tell you about the baker whose devotion to her craft outlasted life itself. Josephine Mueller came to America from Bavaria in 1889, at the age of 22 with her husband Otto. They were bakers, third generation on both sides, and they carried with them the recipes and techniques their families had perfected over decades. They dreamed of opening their own bakery, of bringing real German bread to their new country, of building something that would last. They found a small storefront on Maple Street, in a neighborhood full of immigrants like themselves, German, Irish, Italian, Polish, all seeking their fortunes in this strange new land. The rent was cheap because the previous business had failed. The equipment was old. The building needed work. But Josephine looked at the space and saw possibility. Here, she told Otto, we will make bread that reminds people of home. They opened Mueller's bakery in 1891. Otto handled the business side, orders, accounts, customers. But Josephine was the heart of the operation. She baked bread the old way, the way her grandmother had taught her. She began each morning at 3 o'clock, firing the brick ovens, mixing dough by hand, shaping each loaf with care and intention. Bread is alive, she would say in her thick Bavarian accent. You must treat with respect. You rush, bread knows. You are angry, bread knows. You put love in bread, people taste love. Her bread was extraordinary. Dense, dark rye with caraway seeds. Soft pretzels twisted into perfect knots. Sweet braided loaves for holidays. Each item made with the same careful attention, the same devotion to craft. People began coming from across the city for Mueller's bread. The bakery thrived. But Josephine and Otto never had children. Not from lack of desire but from the cruel randomness of biology. It was a sorrow they carried quietly, filling the absence with work, with community, with the daily ritual of creating nourishment for others. Otto died in 1923 during the influenza pandemic. Josephine mourned deeply but continued the bakery alone. What else could she do? The bread needed baking. The customers needed feeding. The work needed doing. She hired help over the years. Young people from the neighborhood who needed work, who wanted to learn the baker's craft. She taught them the old ways, insisted on doing things properly, demanded the same care and attention she gave herself. You make bread, you feed bodies, she would tell her apprentices. But you make bread with love, you feed souls too. This is sacred work. Never forget. For 52 years Josephine Mueller baked bread. Every morning at 3 o'clock she would arrive at the bakery, fire the ovens, begin the day's work. She never took a vacation. Barely took a sick day. The rhythm of baking structured her life. Mixing, kneading, shaping, baking. It was meditation. It was prayer. It was purpose. In 1943, at age 76, Josephine finally hired someone to take over the bakery. A young German immigrant named Hans Weber who had apprenticed with her for 3 years and understood the importance of doing things properly. She sold him the business for far less than it was worth on one condition. He had to promise to maintain the old recipes, to bake the bread the right way, to remember that this was sacred work. Hans promised. And Josephine, for the first time in 52 years, allowed herself to rest. She lasted exactly 1 month. Without the daily rhythm of baking, without the purpose that had structured her life for over half a century, Josephine simply faded. She died peacefully in her sleep, in the small apartment above the bakery where she'd lived for 52 years. Hans closed the bakery for 1 day, the first and only time it had been closed since opening, for Josephine's funeral. The entire neighborhood came. They mourned not just the loss of a person but the end of an era. Josephine Mueller had been a constant, had fed generations, had made their neighborhood smell like home every morning for as long as anyone could remember. But 3 days after her funeral, something strange happened. Hans arrived at the bakery at 4 in the morning to begin the day's baking as he always did. But when he entered, he found the ovens already warm. Not hot, just warm, as if someone had started the firing process an hour before. The starter for the sourdough had been fed and was bubbling happily. And on the counter, laid out with perfect precision, were the tools he would need for the day's first batch of bread. Hans stood in the darkness, his heart pounding. He was certain he'd locked everything the night before. Certain he was alone in the building. Then he heard it, humming. A quiet, tuneless humming, the sound of someone contentedly working. It came from the direction of the ovens. "Mrs. Mueller?" Hans whispered into the darkness. The humming stopped. But the warmth in the room intensified, not physically but emotionally. Hans felt suddenly, inexplicably, that he wasn't alone. That someone was there with him, approving, encouraging, present. "You're still here," he said, understanding. "You can't leave the bakery." The warmth seemed to pulse once, like an acknowledgement. Hans took a deep breath. "All right. Then, thank you. For preparing the ovens. For feeding the starter. I promise I'll keep baking the bread properly. I promise I'll remember its sacred work." He felt a sense of satisfaction, of peace. And then the presence faded, not gone but receding, giving him space to work. This became the pattern. Every morning when Hans arrived at 4, the ovens would be warming, the starter would be fed, the tools would be laid out. Josephine was still keeping her schedule, still beginning the day's work at 3 o'clock, still preparing the way for the baking that had been her life's purpose. Hans never spoke of this to anyone. Who would believe him? But he grew comfortable with Josephine's presence, grateful for it even. It felt right that she was still there, still part of the bakery she'd built and loved. The bakery changed hands several times over the decades. Hans ran it until 1968, then sold it to a young couple named the Johnsons. They ran it until 1983, then sold to the Park family. Each successive owner experienced the same phenomena: warm ovens, fed starter, prepared tools, and sometimes that gentle humming in the pre-dawn darkness. Some of the owners were spooked and sold quickly. Others, like Hans, learned to be grateful. But none could deny that something unexplainable was happening in the early morning hours before they arrived. The Garcia family bought the bakery in 2009. Isabella and Miguel Garcia were third-generation bakers themselves, from Mexico, carrying their own family traditions and recipes. They'd been searching for years for the right location to open their own place. And when they saw Mueller's bakery, run down and struggling under the previous owners, they saw potential. They renovated carefully, respectfully. They installed new equipment but kept the old brick ovens, too beautiful and functional to replace. They added their own items to the menu: conchas, pan dulce, tres leches cakes, alongside the traditional German breads that had been baked there for over a century. On their first morning in the bakery, Isabella and Miguel arrived at 4 o'clock to begin prep work. They were nervous, excited, ready to prove themselves in this new venture. When Isabella unlocked the door and stepped inside, she immediately noticed 3 things. The brick ovens were warm, the sourdough starter, which they'd been maintaining from the previous owner's culture, was perfectly fed and active, and there was a smell in the air, not just the ghost of old bread, but something like cinnamon and comfort, like someone's grandmother's kitchen. "Miguel," Isabella said quietly, "did you come here earlier? Did you start the ovens?" "No," Miguel said, looking around the dark bakery with wide eyes. "I thought you did." They stood in the darkness, holding hands, suddenly aware that they weren't alone. Then they heard it, humming. Gentle, contented, coming from the direction of the brick ovens. An old tune, something that might have been sung in Bavaria a century ago. "Hello," Isabella called out, her voice shaking slightly. Is someone here? The humming stopped. The air grew warmer, more welcoming. And both Isabella and Miguel felt an overwhelming sense of approval. Of being welcomed. Of being told, without words, that this was right, that they belonged here, that their bread was welcome in this space. I think, Miguel whispered, I think Mrs. Mueller is still here. They'd heard the stories from the previous owners. Whispered tales of the ghost baker who prepared the ovens each morning. They dismissed them as neighborhood legend, as the kind of thing people say about old buildings. But standing there in the pre-dawn darkness, feeling that warm presence, they couldn't deny it anymore. Mrs. Mueller, Isabella said respectfully, addressing the empty air, thank you for welcoming us. We promise to take care of your bakery. We promise to make good bread. We'll honor what you built here while adding our own traditions. Is that all right? The warmth intensified and both of them felt a distinct sense of approval, of blessing even. Then the presence receded, leaving them to their work but not leaving entirely. Just stepping back. Watching. Waiting to see what they would do. Over the following months, Isabella and Miguel learned to work with Josephine's presence. Every morning she would prepare the ovens and feed the starter. In return, the Garcias would speak to her, tell her about their day's plans, ask her opinion on new recipes. Do you think Mrs. Mueller would like us to try this new braiding pattern? Isabella would ask Miguel, holding up a loaf. And sometimes, not always but sometimes, they would feel an answer. A sense of approval or gentle skepticism. They learned to trust these feelings, to incorporate Josephine's wisdom even though she couldn't speak directly. Their daughter, Rosa, grew up in the bakery, arriving each morning at 5 with her parents, doing homework in the corner while they baked. She was 8 years old when she first saw Mrs. Mueller clearly. It was a winter morning, still dark outside, and Rosa had woken early. She came downstairs to the bakery before her parents had arrived and found an old woman working at the counter. Small, sturdy, wearing old-fashioned clothes, humming as she shaped dough with practiced hands. Hello, Rosa said, not frightened because the woman seemed so gentle, so kind. The woman looked up and smiled. Hello, Liebchen. You are the new baker's daughter, yes? Yes. I'm Rosa. Who are you? I am Josephine. I was baker here very long time ago. Now I just help little bit in mornings. Are you a ghost? Rosa asked with the matter-of-fact curiosity of childhood. Josephine laughed, a warm sound like bread rising. Yes, I suppose I am. You are not frightened. No. You seem nice. And you make the bakery smell good. You have good nose. Your parents, they are good bakers. They understand bread needs love. I am happy they are here. Why do you stay? Rosa asked. Don't ghosts usually go to heaven or something? Josephine's smile turned thoughtful. Heaven can wait, I think. This is heaven too, yes. Making bread, feeding people, doing good work. I'm happy here. Not ready to leave. Maybe someday but not now. Now I still have work to do. She held up the dough she'd been shaping, a perfect round loaf. See? Someone must teach the old ways. Someone must remember that bread is sacred. Your parents know this. But I help them remember every morning. Rosa nodded seriously. I want to learn to make bread too. You will. I watch you, you have the touch. Gentle hands, patient heart. You will be good baker someday. Josephine began to fade, becoming translucent. Your parents arrive soon. You tell them Josephine says good morning. Tell them today's starter is especially good, perfect for the dark rye. I will, Rosa promised. But Josephine had already disappeared, leaving only the faintest scent of cinnamon and the shaped loaf of dough on the counter, waiting to be baked. When Isabella and Miguel arrived minutes later, Rosa told them about her conversation with Mrs. Mueller. They listened with wonder and acceptance. By now, they'd experienced enough of Josephine's presence to believe absolutely in her continued existence. She said the starter is perfect for dark rye today, Rosa reported. Miguel checked the starter and smiled. She's right. It's particularly active. We'll do an extra batch of rye. That became another pattern. Rosa would sometimes see Josephine clearly, would receive messages and suggestions, would learn baking techniques from a ghost who had been perfecting her craft for over a century. The old baker and the young girl formed an unlikely friendship, spanning the boundary between life and death through their shared love of bread. Now Rosa is 16 and works in the bakery every morning before school. She's learned both her parents' Mexican recipes and Josephine's German techniques. She's learning to feel when dough is properly kneaded, to sense when bread is perfectly baked, to understand that bread making is part science, part art, and part love. And every morning when the Garcias arrive at the bakery at 4 o'clock, they find the same signs of Josephine's presence. Warm ovens, fed starter, prepared tools, and sometimes that gentle humming that speaks of work lovingly done. They leave her small offerings: a slice of the day's best bread on the counter overnight, a candle lit in the window, a photo of her from the 1920s hung respectfully on the wall. Not because she demands these things, but because she deserves honor, gratitude, and remembrance. "Thank you, Mrs. Mueller," Isabella says every morning as she begins the day's baking. "Thank you for teaching us. Thank you for still caring for this place. Thank you for showing us that bread is sacred work." And though Josephine never appears to Isabella as clearly as she appears to Rosa, Isabella always feels that warm presence, that sense of approval, that wordless communication that says, "Yes, you understand. You're doing good work. Keep going." Narrator. And so Josephine Mueller continues her eternal morning ritual, arriving at 3 o'clock to prepare the ovens, to feed the starter, to ready the bakery for another day of sacred work. Like Samuel at his lighthouse, Evelyn in her library, and Alexander in his concert hall, Josephine found that death was simply another rising, one more beginning in an endless cycle of creation. The bread must be baked. The people must be fed. The work must continue. These simple truths anchor her to the place she loved, give her purpose beyond life, keep her present in the pre-dawn darkness where the day's first loaves are shaped with love. The bakery still stands on Maple Street. The smell of fresh bread still perfumes the morning air. And Josephine Mueller still keeps her watch, teaching new generations that bread is alive, that rushing ruins it, that love is the most important ingredient of all. Rest now, dear listener. Imagine the quiet bakery in the hours before dawn, the gentle rhythm of kneading, the warm comfort of rising dough. Know that somewhere, every morning, someone is doing sacred work with devotion that transcends mortality. Sleep peacefully. The bread is being tended. All is well. The gardener's eternal spring. In the heart of the city, where concrete and steel have claimed nearly every inch of ground, there exists a garden that shouldn't be possible. The Ashford Memorial Garden, tucked between office buildings and apartment complexes, is a sanctuary of green, 3 acres of flowering trees, winding paths, hidden benches, and plants that bloom in defiance of season and scents. Roses bloom in January. Tulips appear in August. The garden seems to exist in its own private springtime, regardless of what the calendar says or what the weather demands. The city's Department of Parks and Recreation maintains the garden officially, but the groundskeepers will tell you, if you ask quietly and gain their trust, that they're not the ones who truly tend this place. That would be Thomas Ashford, who died in 1952 and has been gardening here ever since. Let me tell you about the man who loved growing things so much that death could not make him stop. Thomas Ashford was born in 1872 on a farm outside the city, back when the city was smaller and the countryside came right up to its edges. He grew up with dirt under his fingernails and an intuitive understanding of how things grew. His mother said he could make anything flourish, that he had the touch, the gift, the mysterious ability to coax life from the earth that some people simply possessed. Thomas left the farm at 20 to study horticulture at the agricultural college. He learned the science behind what he'd always known instinctively: soil composition, plant biology, cultivation techniques. But he never lost the deeper understanding, the sense that plants were not just botanical specimens but living beings that responded to care, to attention, to love. He worked for various wealthy families, designing and maintaining elaborate gardens. He was brilliant at his craft, sought after, well paid. But something bothered him. The gardens he created were beautiful, yes, but they were also exclusive, enjoyed only by the wealthy few who could afford his services, hidden behind walls and gates where ordinary people never saw them. Gardens should be for everyone, he told his wife Catherine one evening. Beauty shouldn't be only for the rich. Everyone needs green growing things. Everyone needs flowers. Catherine, practical and supportive, asked the obvious question, "So what will you do about it?" In 1903, at age 31, Thomas approached the city with a proposal. There was a plot of land, 3 acres, that had been left vacant after a building fire. The land was considered unusable, contaminated by the fire and subsequent years of neglect. The city was planning to sell it for development. Thomas wanted it for a public garden. "I'll clean the soil myself," he promised the city council. "I'll design and plant everything. I'll maintain it without city funding for the first 5 years. All I ask is that you deed the land as a permanent public garden. Free access always for anyone who wants to sit among growing things." The council, seeing an opportunity to improve the city at no cost, agreed. They gave him the 3 acres and wished him luck with the contaminated soil. Thomas spent 2 years preparing the ground. He removed toxins, amended the soil, built up the earth's health one careful layer at a time. Catherine worked beside him, as did volunteers from the neighborhood who caught his vision of a garden for everyone. When they finally began planting in 1905, Thomas created something extraordinary. Not a formal garden with rigid design, but a living sanctuary, winding paths that invited exploration, hidden corners where people could sit in solitude, open spaces where children could play. He planted flowers for every season, trees for shade, herbs for the ladies who cooked and couldn't afford to buy them. He created a garden that welcomed everyone and belonged to no one. The Ashford Garden, as people began calling it, became the neighborhood's heart. Thomas and Catherine lived in a small cottage at the garden's edge, and Thomas tended the plants every single day. He worked in all weather, in all seasons, learning the particular needs of this ground, these plants, this place. "A garden is never finished," he would tell the children who followed him around, asking questions. "It's always growing, always changing. You tend it today and tomorrow it needs tending again. That's the beauty of it, it's alive. It needs you." The garden thrived under his care. More than thrived. It flourished in ways that seemed almost magical. Plants that shouldn't have been able to grow in the city's harsh conditions not only survived but prospered. Flowers bloomed longer, more abundantly than they should have. People came from across the city just to walk through Thomas's garden and feel for a moment like they were somewhere green and growing instead of trapped in concrete and noise. In 1910, the city officially renamed it the Ashford Memorial Garden, though Thomas was still very much alive. The name was meant to honor his work, to ensure that even after he was gone, people would remember who created this sanctuary. Thomas and Catherine had no children, but the garden was their legacy. They poured their lives into it for 47 years. Thomas worked until he was nearly 80, still tending the plants with hands gnarled by age and arthritis but gentle as ever. Catherine died in 1950 and Thomas mourned deeply. But he continued working in the garden. What else could he do? The plants needed him. The garden needed him. Without Catherine, the garden was all he had left of the life they'd built together. 2 years later, in the spring of 1952, Thomas Ashford died. He was found peacefully in the garden, sitting on his favorite bench beneath the old oak tree he'd planted nearly 50 years earlier, surrounded by the roses he'd cultivated for decades. He was buried beside Catherine in the small cemetery at the garden's edge, and the city held a memorial service. Thousands came, people whose lives had been touched by the garden he'd created and maintained, who wanted to thank the man who'd given them beauty freely, who'd insisted that gardens should belong to everyone. The city's Department of Parks and Recreation took over maintenance. They were competent, professional, well-trained. But within a year the garden began to struggle. Plants that had thrived under Thomas's care started to falter. Flowers bloomed less abundantly. The sense of vitality, of life, began to fade. The groundskeepers couldn't understand it. They followed all the proper procedures, used the right techniques, did everything by the book. But something was missing. The garden was slowly dying. Then one spring morning something changed. The head groundskeeper, a man named William, arrived at the garden at dawn to find it transformed. Plants that had been struggling were suddenly lush. Flowers that shouldn't have bloomed yet were opening. The entire garden glowed with life and health. And on his favorite bench beneath the oak tree sat the translucent figure of an old man, smiling with deep satisfaction at the flourishing garden around him. William stopped, stared, rubbed his eyes. The figure remained. Thomas Ashford, unmistakable from the photographs in the garden's small museum, was sitting on the bench as he must have sat there thousands of times in life. The figure noticed William, nodded in greeting, then faded like morning mist. William stood in shock for several minutes. Then, because he was a practical man and a gardener himself, he began examining the plants. Every single one showed signs of recent, expert care. Pruning, deadheading, soil amendment, all done with a skill and intuition William recognized as far beyond his own abilities. Thomas had returned to his garden. And he'd brought it back to life. This became the pattern. The groundskeepers would maintain the garden during the day, doing the routine work, the necessary labor. But the real caretaking happened at night, when Thomas would appear and tend to his plants with the same devotion he'd shown in life. The groundskeepers learned to work with him. They would leave difficult problems, a sick tree, a stubborn plant, a section that wouldn't thrive, and return the next morning to find them addressed, fixed, healed. They would leave notes asking for advice and find answers somehow provided. A plant moved to a better location, a new companion planting that solved a problem, a subtle demonstration of technique. Mr. Ashford still tends the garden, became the unofficial explanation passed down through generations of groundskeepers. We maintain it. He perfects it. The garden began to develop its unusual characteristics. Flowers blooming out of season. Plants thriving in conditions they shouldn't tolerate. A sense of eternal springtime regardless of calendar or weather. Thomas, no longer bound by the limitations of physical existence, could make the garden into what he'd always dreamed it could be. A place where life triumphed over all obstacles, where growing things never stopped growing, where spring was not a season but a permanent state of being. Maya Patel discovered the garden when she was 7 years old, in 1998, 46 years after Thomas's death. She'd recently moved to the city with her family, immigrants from India, and she desperately missed the gardens of her grandmother's home in Kerala. The concrete city felt hostile, gray, lifeless. Then her mother took her to Ashford Memorial Garden, and Maya felt like she could breathe again. Green, growing things, flowers, life. She began visiting every day after school, doing her homework on the benches, reading under the trees, simply existing in a place that felt alive. She noticed the unusual plantings, combinations that shouldn't work but somehow did, flowers blooming impossibly out of season, the sense that the garden had its own rules that superseded nature's normal patterns. And one evening, as twilight settled and she lingered later than usual, she saw him. An old man moving through the garden with slow, careful grace, touching plants gently, speaking to them in a language Maya couldn't hear but somehow understood. He moved like someone who knew every inch of this ground, every plant by name, every branch and bud and root. He turned and saw Maya watching. Instead of disappearing as she half expected a ghost to do, he smiled and gestured for her to approach. "You love the garden," he said. His voice was quiet, kind, had a quality like wind through leaves. "Yes," Maya said, not frightened because he radiated such gentleness. "I come here every day. It reminds me of my grandmother's garden back home." "Where is home?" "Kerala. In India. My grandmother grows everything. Flowers, vegetables, herbs. She says plants are family and you have to treat them with love." Thomas's smile widened. "Your grandmother is wise." "That is exactly right. What is your name, child?" "Maya. I am Thomas. I take care of this garden." "I know who you are," Maya said. "There's a plaque. You created this garden. But you died a long time ago." "Yes. But the garden still needs tending. And I am not quite ready to stop." He gestured around at the flourishing plants. "Do you see how they grow? They grow because they are loved. Because someone pays attention. Gardens are not just about soil and water and sunlight. They are about presence. About care. About showing up every day and tending what you love." He knelt beside a rose bush and beckoned Maya closer. "This rose, she is struggling. You see, the leaves are beginning to yellow. Most people would not notice yet. But if you pay attention, if you listen, plants tell you what they need before they become sick." Maya looked closely at the plant, seeing what Thomas pointed out. "She needs different soil. More acidity. I will fix tonight. But I want to show you, this is how you care for garden. You pay attention. You notice small things. You respond before problems become big." He looked at Maya with sharp, kind eyes. "You have the touch, I think. Like your grandmother. You could be gardener if you wanted." "I'd like that," Maya said. "But I don't know enough." "You can learn. And if you come to garden, pay attention, I will teach you. Not with words always. Words are not best way to learn gardening. But I will show you. You watch what I do and you will understand." Over the following years, Maya became Thomas's student. She would visit the garden regularly and he would appear. Not always, not predictably, but often enough. He would show her how to prune, how to identify plant needs, how to understand the subtle language of growing things. He taught without formal lessons, Simply by example, by doing the work while she watched and absorbed and gradually understood. Maya learned to garden the way Thomas had learned. Through attention, through practice, through developing an intuitive sense of what plants needed. She learned to see as Thomas saw, to hear what plants were saying, to respond with the right care at the right time. When Maya was 16, the city's Department of Parks and Recreation offered her a summer internship in the Gardens Division. She accepted and spent her summer working in various city gardens, including Ashford Memorial. The supervising groundskeeper, noticing her unusual skill, asked where she'd learned. "Mr. Ashford taught me," Maya said without thinking. The groundskeeper nodded seriously. "Then you learned from the best. He still teaches anyone who's willing to pay attention." Maya worked in the Gardens Division through college, studying horticulture formally while still learning informally from Thomas's nighttime demonstrations. She became the head groundskeeper of Ashford Memorial Garden at age 32, the same age Thomas had been when he first created the garden. Now, leading her own team, Maya maintains the tradition Thomas established. The garden is free always. It welcomes everyone. It belongs to no one and exists for all. And at night, Thomas still tends to his plants, still coaxes life from earth, still ensures that his garden remains the sanctuary he dreamed of creating over a century ago. Maya sees him regularly now. They've developed a quiet partnership. She maintains the garden during the day, handling the physical work, the administrative tasks, the interaction with the public. He perfects it at night, providing the intuitive understanding, the deep knowledge, the love that makes the garden more than just a collection of plants. Sometimes they work together in the twilight hours between day and night. Maya will be deadheading roses and Thomas will appear beside her, showing her a better technique. She'll be planning a new bed and he'll suggest a plant combination she wouldn't have considered. They don't need many words. Gardening is a language they both speak fluently. One evening, Maya asks him the question she's wondered about for years. "Why do you stay? You could rest. You could be with Catherine. Why do you still come back to work in the garden?" Thomas is quiet for a long moment, his translucent hands resting on a rake that seems solid enough when he holds it. "Catherine is here," he says finally. "In the garden. In the oak tree we planted together. In the roses she loved. In the earth where we both are buried. I am not apart from her, I am with her always here." He gestures around at the flourishing garden. "And this is my gift to the world. Catherine and I had no children, but this is our legacy. A place where anyone can come and feel peace and see beauty, and remember that life continues, that things grow, that spring always returns. How could I leave this? How could I stop tending what I love?" Maya understands. She's felt it herself. The way the garden becomes part of you, the way caring for it becomes not just work but purpose, the way watching things grow and flourish feeds something essential in the soul. "I'll keep helping you," Maya says. "For as long as I'm able. And when I can't anymore, I'll teach someone else. Your garden will continue." Thomas smiles, and for a moment he looks not like a ghost but like a living man, vital and joyful. "Thank you, child. That is all any gardener can hope for, that the garden continues, that the work goes on, that life keeps growing." Narrator. And so Thomas Ashford continues his eternal spring, tending the garden he created over a century ago, coaxing life from earth with hands that death could not still. Like Samuel at his lighthouse, Evelyn in her library, Alexander in his concert hall, and Josephine in her bakery, Thomas found that his life's work transcended mortality itself. The garden must be tended. The plants must be cared for. The sanctuary must be maintained. These truths anchor him to the place he loved, give him purpose beyond life, keep him present in the quiet hours when the garden speaks most clearly to those who know how to listen. Ashford Memorial Garden still blooms in impossible ways, still welcomes everyone freely, still offers sanctuary in the midst of the concrete city. And Thomas Ashford still watches over it all, ensuring that spring never truly ends in the place he made as his gift to the world. Rest now, dear listener. Imagine the quiet garden in the gentle evening light, the flowers releasing their fragrance, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Know that somewhere always something is growing, tended by hands both seen and unseen, loved into life by devotion that outlasts death. Sleep peacefully. The garden is being tended. All is well. The teacher's classroom. In the old brick schoolhouse on the corner of 5th and Elm, where generations of children have learned their letters and numbers, where wooden floors creak with the memory of 10,000 footsteps, there is a classroom on the second floor that teachers ask for specifically. Room 207. Miss Harriet Coleman's room. The room has been reassigned countless times over the decades. Different teachers, different grades, different subjects. But everyone who teaches there feels it. A presence that watches over the students with benevolent care, that helps struggling children understand difficult concepts, that creates an atmosphere where learning feels not like work but like discovery. The school board doesn't officially acknowledge it, of course. But the teachers know. Room 207 is still Miss Coleman's classroom, even though she died in 1959. And if you're lucky enough to teach there, you'll have the finest educational partner anyone could ask for. A teacher so dedicated that 65 years of death haven't dimmed her commitment to helping children learn. Let me tell you about the woman who believed that every child deserved to understand and who never stopped teaching. Harriet Coleman was born in 1881, the daughter of freed slaves who had made their way north after the Civil War. She grew up in a time when educational opportunities for black children were scarce, when many believed that people who looked like her weren't capable of higher learning, when every door seemed designed to close in her face. But Harriet was brilliant, determined, and blessed with a mother who insisted she would have every opportunity that had been denied to previous generations. She attended school, then normal school, to become a teacher, facing discrimination and doubt at every turn but refusing to accept that any barrier was permanent. In 1903, at age 22, Harriet became a teacher at the segregated elementary school for black children. The building was a former warehouse, poorly heated, with hand-me-down books and broken desks. She taught 45 children across 6 grade levels in a single room, with almost no supplies and a salary half what white teachers earned. She taught there for 32 years. And she changed hundreds of lives. Harriet had a gift. An ability to see past a child's struggle to the understanding waiting to be unlocked. She knew that children who seemed slow often just needed a different explanation, a new approach, more patience. She knew that children who seemed defiant were often frustrated by concepts they couldn't grasp. She knew that every child, every single one, could learn if someone took the time to teach them properly. There are no unteachable children, she would say. Only teachers who haven't found the right way yet. She stayed late every day working with children who needed extra help. She came in early for students whose home lives were chaotic and who needed a quiet place to focus. She used her own meager salary to buy books and supplies the school board wouldn't provide. She taught not just reading and arithmetic but hope, the radical belief that these children, despite what the world told them, were capable of anything. In 1935, the city finally built a proper school for black children. A real building with heat and windows and enough books. Harriet moved to the new school and continued teaching there for another 20 years, now with better resources but the same tireless dedication. She taught children whose parents she taught. She taught children who would become doctors, teachers, business owners, community leaders. She taught children who would march for civil rights, who would push open doors that had been closed, who would create opportunities for the generations that followed. And she taught every single one of them the same message. You are capable. You are worthy. You can learn anything if you don't give up. And I will never give up on you. In 1954, Brown v. Board of Education declared school segregation unconstitutional. The following year, the city began integrating its schools. Harriet, now 74, was asked to move to the formerly all-white Lincoln Elementary School, the old brick building on 5th and Elm, to teach in an integrated classroom for the first time. Some of the white parents protested. Some said they wouldn't allow their children to be taught by a black woman. But the school board, under pressure from changing laws and changing times, held firm. Harriet Coleman was one of the district's finest teachers, and she would teach at Lincoln Elementary in room 207. Harriet walked into that classroom in September 1955 with her head high and her expectations unchanged. She would teach every child in her care, regardless of color, the same thing she'd always taught. That they were capable, that learning was possible, that she would never give up on them. The first weeks were difficult. Some children had been taught to disrespect her. Some refused to do their work. Parents complained. But Harriet simply continued teaching, patiently, firmly, with the same dedication she'd shown for 52 years. And gradually things changed. The children learned that Miss Coleman's classroom was a place where everyone was expected to try their best, where help was always available, where understanding was valued more than obedience. They learned that she meant what she said. She would never give up on them. And they began to trust her. By the end of that first integrated year, Room 207 had become the most requested classroom in the school. Children wanted Miss Coleman. Parents who had protested her hiring now asked specifically for their children to be placed with her. She'd proven once again that good teaching transcended any boundary society tried to impose. Harriet taught for 4 more years at Lincoln Elementary. In 1959, at age 78, she was still teaching, still staying late to help struggling students, still insisting that every child could learn. She died at her desk in room 207 on a Friday afternoon in March, after the children had left for the day. She was grading papers, carefully marking where students had succeeded, gently noting where they needed more help, writing encouraging comments in her precise handwriting. She simply stopped mid-sentence, her pen still resting on a student's arithmetic test. A peaceful end to a life dedicated entirely to teaching. The school held a memorial service. Hundreds attended, former students spanning 5 decades, parents, colleagues, community members whose lives she'd touched. They mourned her passing but celebrated her legacy. She had taught over 2,000 children across 56 years, and every single one of them had left her classroom knowing they were capable of learning, that they mattered, that someone believed in them. Room 207 was reassigned to a new teacher the following year. And that's when the phenomena began. Teachers working late would hear footsteps in room 207 when the room was empty. The chalk would be arranged differently in the morning than it had been left the previous evening. Papers left scattered on desks would be found neatly stacked. And sometimes, especially when a teacher was struggling with how to explain a concept to a particular child, a solution would simply occur to them, appearing in their mind fully formed, accompanied by a gentle sense of encouragement. The presence was never frightening, just helpful, supportive, present. Children sometimes reported seeing an elderly black woman in old-fashioned clothes sitting at the teacher's desk or standing by the blackboard. She never spoke, just watched with kind eyes, occasionally nodding in approval or shaking her head gently when a student was about to make a mistake. Miss Coleman is still teaching, became the unofficial explanation whispered among Lincoln Elementary's staff. She's not haunting. She's just still here. Still helping. The teachers who worked in room 207 learned to be grateful for her presence. They would ask her questions aloud. Miss Coleman, how do I help Sarah understand fractions? And somehow an answer would come. A new approach. A different explanation. An insight into what the child needed. Students who struggled would sometimes feel a gentle touch on their shoulder, a wordless encouragement to keep trying. Children who were about to give up would sense a presence that said clearly as words, I haven't given up on you. Don't give up on yourself. Marcus Washington first encountered Miss Coleman when he was 8 years old, in 1995, 36 years after her death. He'd just transferred to Lincoln Elementary mid-year after his family moved across town. He was behind in his reading, struggling with comprehension, terrified he'd never catch up. His new teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, taught in room 207. On his first day, Marcus sat at his desk feeling overwhelmed and stupid as the other children read aloud with ease. He couldn't make the words make sense. The letters jumbled. He fell further behind with each passing minute. Then he felt it, a gentle hand on his shoulder. He turned, expecting Ms. Rodriguez, but no one was there. Yet the sensation remained, and with it came a feeling he couldn't quite articulate. You can do this. Don't give up. I'm here to help. That night Marcus had a dream. An elderly black woman sat beside him, her face kind and patient. She showed him a trick for sounding out words, a way to break sentences into manageable pieces, a method for understanding that no one had taught him before. Learning is not race, she said in his dream, her voice gentle and firm. Everyone learns at their own pace. You take your time. You practice. You will understand. I promise you. When Marcus woke, he remembered the dream with unusual clarity. And when he tried reading that morning, the techniques from his dream actually worked. The words made more sense. The comprehension came easier. He told Ms. Rodriguez about his dream, describing the woman in detail. Ms. Rodriguez listened carefully, then walked Marcus to the hallway where old photographs of former Lincoln Elementary staff hung on the wall. Was it this woman? Ms. Rodriguez asked, pointing to a photograph labeled, Miss Harriet Coleman, 1955 to 1959. Yes. Marcus said. That's her. Who is she? She was a teacher here a long time ago. One of the very best. And she still helps children who need extra support. Especially in room 207. Ms. Rodriguez knelt to Marcus's level. Miss Coleman chose to help you. That means she sees potential in you just like I do. She taught children for 56 years and she knew something important. Everyone can learn. You can learn. You just need patience and practice and people who won't give up on you. Neither Miss Coleman nor I will give up on you. So don't you give up either. Over the following months, Marcus worked on his reading with Ms. Rodriguez's help during the day and Miss Coleman's presence at night. He had more dreams where she taught him, encouraged him, showed him techniques that made learning easier. And gradually his reading improved. By the end of the year Marcus had caught up to his classmates. By 5th grade he was reading above grade level. By high school he'd fallen in love with literature. And when he graduated college with a degree in education he knew exactly what he wanted to do. Marcus Washington became a teacher. And when a position opened at Lincoln Elementary, he applied specifically to teach in room 207. I want to teach where Miss Coleman taught, he told the principal during his interview. She helped me when I was struggling. Now I want to help others the same way. The principal, who'd been at Lincoln Elementary for 20 years and knew all about room 207's peculiar atmosphere, smiled. I think you'll be an excellent fit for that classroom. Marcus taught in room 207 for 15 years. During that time he experienced Miss Coleman's presence regularly, not as dramatically as the dreams of his childhood, but as a constant gentle support. When he struggled to reach a difficult student he would feel her encouragement. Try a different way. Don't give up. Every child can learn. He developed a reputation for being able to reach struggling students, for never giving up on children others had written off, for believing absolutely that every child was capable of learning. His colleagues marveled at his patience, his creativity, his unwavering dedication. I learned from the best, Marcus would say. Miss Coleman taught me that there are no unteachable children, only teachers who haven't found the right way yet. One evening, working late in room 207, grading papers just as Miss Coleman had been doing when she died, Marcus felt her presence more strongly than ever before. He looked up from his desk and saw her clearly, not translucent, not ghostly, but solid and real, sitting in the student desk across from him, her hands folded, her expression proud. You've done well, she said, her voice exactly as it had been in his childhood dreams. You've become the teacher I knew you could be. You taught me, Marcus said, not frightened, only grateful. You showed me that I could learn, that I could become anything. You never gave up on me. And now you don't give up on them. Miss Coleman gestured to the papers on his desk. Assignments from his current students, children struggling just as he had struggled. This is the work that matters. Not famous discoveries or great achievements. This, helping children understand, giving them hope, showing them they are capable. This is how we change the world. One child at a time. One lesson at a time. One person who refuses to give up. She stood and Marcus stood with her. For a moment, they stood together in the quiet classroom where she taught for 4 years and where her presence had remained for 65 more. Why do you stay? Marcus asked gently. You've done so much. Don't you deserve to rest? Rest. Miss Coleman smiled. I rested for 78 years before I became a teacher and I'll rest for eternity after. But these few years, these few decades when I can still help children learn, why would I not stay? Why would I not continue the work I loved? She placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. You understand now. You feel it too. Teaching is not just a job. It's a calling. It's a privilege. It's a responsibility. And when you love it as we do, when you see every child as worthy of your best effort, as capable of learning, as deserving of patience and care, you can't simply stop because something as small as death gets in the way. She began to fade, becoming translucent again, returning to the gentle presence that always inhabited room 207. Keep teaching, Marcus. Keep believing in them. Keep refusing to give up. That's all I ever did. That's all any good teacher does. And it's enough. It's always enough. Marcus continued teaching in room 207 for another 10 years, until he became principal of Lincoln Elementary. When he moved to the main office, he made sure room 207 went to another teacher who would appreciate its unique atmosphere, who would welcome Miss Coleman's continued presence, who would understand that they were teaching in partnership with one of the finest educators the school had ever known. Now, 70 years after her death, Miss Coleman still watches over room 207. Teachers still feel her support. Children still sense her encouragement. The classroom still has an atmosphere that somehow makes learning feel possible, even for students who struggle everywhere else. And sometimes, late in the afternoon when the light falls just right through the tall windows, you can see her. An elderly woman in old-fashioned clothes, standing at the blackboard or sitting at the teacher's desk, her face showing the same patient concentration it held in life. Still teaching. Still believing in every child. Still refusing to give up. Narrator. And so Harriet Coleman continues her eternal lesson, watching over room 207, helping teachers find new ways to explain difficult concepts, encouraging children who struggle to keep trying. Like Samuel at his lighthouse, Evelyn in her library, Alexander in his concert hall, Josephine in her bakery, and Thomas in his garden, Harriet found that her life's purpose, teaching children that they were capable, transcended death itself. The children must be taught. The struggling must be encouraged. The work must continue. These truths anchor her to the classroom she loved, give her purpose beyond life, keep her present in the quiet moments when a child needs someone who won't give up on them. Room 207 still serves as a classroom at Lincoln Elementary. Children still learn there. Teachers still inspire there. And Harriet Coleman still watches over it all, ensuring that no child leaves her classroom without knowing they are capable, worthy, and believed in. Rest now, dear listener. Imagine the quiet classroom in the late afternoon light, the soft sound of chalk on board, the peaceful atmosphere where learning feels like discovery rather than work. Know that somewhere, always, someone is teaching, showing children they are capable, refusing to give up, changing the world one student at a time. Sleep peacefully. The lesson continues. All is well. The Nurse's Night Watch. In St. Catherine's Hospital, a sprawling building of brick and limestone that has served the community for over 100 years, there is a ward on the third floor where patients sleep more peacefully than anywhere else in the hospital. The pediatric ward. Where sick children recover, where worried parents keep vigil, where the most vulnerable among us fight their smallest and largest battles. The doctors can't explain why recovery rates are higher on the third floor. Why children who are frightened seem to find unexpected comfort. Why parents who sit through long, terrifying nights report feeling that someone else is watching over their child. Someone kind and competent who makes them feel less alone. But the night shift nurses know. They've always known. Sister Margaret O'Brien never left her ward. And every night for the past 73 years she's continued making her rounds, checking on the children, adjusting blankets, offering comfort to those who wake frightened in the dark. She does this work not because she must, but because she cannot imagine doing anything else. Let me tell you about the nurse who loved her patients so much that death became just another shift change. Margaret O'Brien was born in Ireland in 1878, the seventh of 9 children in a family that struggled with poverty but never with love. When she was 12, her youngest brother fell ill with scarlet fever. Margaret sat with him through long nights, cooling his forehead with damp cloths, singing to him when he cried, praying that he would recover. He didn't. But in those nights of watching over him, Margaret discovered something about herself. She was good at this. Good at providing comfort. Good at staying calm when others panicked. Good at being present with suffering without being overwhelmed by it. When she was 18, Margaret immigrated to America and entered nursing school, one of the first formal programs for nurses, during a time when nursing was just becoming a recognized profession. She trained under strict nuns who taught her that nursing was not just a job but a vocation, a calling, a sacred responsibility to care for those who could not care for themselves. Margaret took this teaching to heart. She became a nurse in 1900 and immediately began working at St. Catherine's Hospital, which had just opened its doors. She was assigned to the children's ward, and she knew instantly that she had found her place in the world. Children were different patients than adults. They couldn't always articulate what hurt. They were frightened by hospitals, by pain, by being separated from their parents. They needed not just medical care but comfort, reassurance, the sense that someone kind was watching over them. Margaret provided all of this. She had a gift for calming frightened children, for making medicine taking less traumatic, for creating an atmosphere where healing felt possible. She would sing Irish lullabies to children who couldn't sleep. She would tell stories to distract them from procedures. She would hold hands, wipe tears, and provide the kind of gentle presence that made children feel safe even when they were sick and scared. Children need more than medicine, she would tell younger nurses. They need to feel safe. They need to know someone cares. Sometimes that's the most important medicine we can give. In 1910, Margaret took her vows and became a nursing sister with the Order of St. Catherine, a religious order dedicated to medical care. She wore the habit, followed the discipline, but her real devotion was to the children on the third floor. She worked night shifts almost exclusively, preferring the quiet hours when she could focus entirely on her patients without the bustle of daytime activity. For 41 years, Sister Margaret worked the night shift on the pediatric ward. She became a fixture, a legend, the nurse that parents requested specifically because she made their frightened children feel safe. She worked through the Spanish flu pandemic, through polio outbreaks, through the Depression, through 2 world wars. Children's illnesses changed, treatments evolved, but Sister Margaret's care remained constant. Gentle, competent, devoted. She never missed a shift. Never took a vacation. The hospital was her home, the children her purpose, the night watch her calling. "Don't you ever want to rest?" the younger nurses would ask. "Don't you ever want a life outside these walls?" "This is my life," Sister Margaret would reply simply. "These children need me. Why would I want to be anywhere else?" In 1951, at age 73, Sister Margaret finally agreed to retire. The hospital administration insisted. She was growing frail, her hearing was failing, her hands shook with age. It was time to rest, they said. Time to let younger nurses take over the night watch. Sister Margaret agreed reluctantly. She trained her replacement carefully, showed her all the small things that made night rounds on the pediatric ward different from other wards, made her promise to sing to the children who couldn't sleep. On her last shift, Sister Margaret made her final rounds. She checked each child, adjusted each blanket, whispered a blessing over each sleeping form. Then she sat in the nurse's station and wept quietly, grieving for the work she loved that she could no longer do. She died 3 weeks later. Just stopped eating, stopped speaking, faded away. The doctor said it was heart failure, but the nurses who'd worked with her knew the truth. Sister Margaret had died of a broken heart, of a life suddenly without purpose, of being separated from the work that had given her meaning for over half a century. The hospital held a memorial service. Hundreds attended, former patients now grown, parents who remembered her kindness, colleagues who'd learned from her example. They celebrated a life of service, of devotion, of countless children cared for with gentle competence. Sister Margaret was buried in the convent cemetery. And the pediatric ward felt emptier without her, quieter, less safe somehow. But then 3 nights after her funeral something happened. A night nurse named Catherine was doing rounds on the 3rd floor at 2 in the morning. She checked on a little boy recovering from pneumonia and found him sleeping peacefully, his blanket carefully tucked around him. She was certain he'd been uncovered when she checked an hour earlier. He was a restless sleeper who kicked off his blankets constantly. She moved to the next room and found a little girl who'd been crying earlier now calm, her hand resting on a worn rosary that definitely hadn't been there before. Catherine recognized it immediately. Sister Margaret's rosary, distinctive with its Irish green beads. But that rosary had been buried with Sister Margaret. Catherine had seen it in the casket. As Catherine stood there, puzzled and slightly unnerved, she smelled something familiar. The faint scent of lavender and carbolic soap that had always clung to Sister Margaret's habit. And she heard very softly the sound of footsteps in the corridor, the distinctive shuffle step of someone in long skirts, walking slowly but purposefully. Catherine went to the corridor. It was empty. But the sound of footsteps continued, moving from room to room, pausing at each door as if someone was checking on each patient. "Sister Margaret?" Catherine whispered into the empty hallway. The footsteps stopped. The air grew warmer, more comforting. And Catherine felt with absolute certainty that she was not alone on the ward. That someone else was making rounds. Someone who had made these same rounds every night for 41 years and saw no reason to stop just because of something as minor as death. This became the pattern. Every night, the night shift nurses would experience signs of Sister Margaret's presence. Blankets would be tucked around restless children. Frightened patients would calm unexpectedly. The call button would ring in rooms where children needed help, even when the children were too young or too sick to have pressed it themselves. And sometimes, especially on difficult nights when children were very sick or very scared, nurses would glimpse her. A tall figure in an old-fashioned habit, moving quietly through the ward, stopping at each bed, providing the same gentle care she'd provided in life. The nurses learned not to be frightened. Sister Margaret's presence wasn't eerie or unsettling. It was comforting, helpful, exactly what you'd want in a colleague. She was simply continuing her work, keeping her eternal night watch over the children she'd never been willing to leave. The hospital administration never officially acknowledged Sister Margaret's continued presence, of course. But they didn't need to. The nurses knew. The parents knew. And somehow the children knew too. Emma Rodriguez first met Sister Margaret when she was 6 years old, in 1998, 47 years after the nun's death. Emma had been admitted to St. Catherine's with a severe asthma attack. She was struggling to breathe, terrified by the oxygen mask, frightened by the strange hospital room and the absence of her parents, who'd been sent home to rest. It was 3 a.m. Emma was supposed to be sleeping, but she couldn't. She was too scared. She pressed the call button, but the night nurse was busy with another patient in crisis. Emma waited, fighting panic, feeling like she couldn't breathe despite the oxygen flowing into her mask. Then she felt it, a cool hand on her forehead, gentle and competent. She opened her eyes and saw a tall woman in old-fashioned nurse's clothes, her face lined with age but kind beyond measure. "There now, child," the woman said, her voice carrying a soft Irish lilt. "You're all right. You're safe. Just breathe slowly. In and out. That's it. You're doing grand." The woman adjusted Emma's pillows, making it easier to breathe. She checked the oxygen flow, satisfied herself that everything was working properly. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and began singing softly, an Irish lullaby, gentle and soothing in a language Emma didn't understand but somehow felt comforted by. Emma's panic faded. Her breathing steadied. The terror receded. She felt safe, watched over, cared for by someone who knew exactly what to do. "Who are you?" Emma whispered. "I'm Sister Margaret. I take care of the children here. I've been doing it for a very long time." She smiled. "You rest now. I'll watch over you. You're not alone." Emma fell asleep holding the woman's hand. When she woke in the morning, the nun was gone, but Emma's breathing was steady, her crisis had passed. The day nurse checking her chart looked surprised. "You did very well last night," she said. "Your oxygen levels stabilized around 3 a.m. Did the night nurse help you with that?" "Sister Margaret helped me," Emma said. "She sang to me. She made me feel better." The day nurse went very still. "Sister Margaret?" "Yes." The nun in the old-fashioned clothes. "She said she takes care of the children here." The day nurse smiled gently. "Yes, she does. She's been doing it for a very long time. You're lucky she came to help you. She only appears when children really need her." Emma was hospitalized for 3 more nights. Each night, Sister Margaret would visit, checking on her, singing to her, providing the gentle presence that made the frightening hospital experience more bearable. By the time Emma was discharged, her asthma was under control, but more importantly, her fear of hospitals had been replaced by a sense that hospitals were places where people cared, where someone would watch over you when you were vulnerable. Years later, when Emma was choosing a career path, she remembered Sister Margaret. The gentle competence. The absolute dedication. The way she'd made a frightened child feel safe. Emma became a nurse. And when she was offered a position at St. Catherine's Hospital, she requested the pediatric ward, 3rd floor, night shift. "You know about Sister Margaret?" the nursing supervisor asked during her interview. "She took care of me when I was 6, Emma said. "She showed me what nursing should be. Now I want to help continue her work." Emma worked the night shift on the pediatric ward for 20 years. During that time, she experienced Sister Margaret's presence regularly. Not every night. Some nights Emma handled everything herself. But on difficult nights, when children were very sick or very scared, Sister Margaret would appear. Sometimes Emma would see her clearly, moving through the ward in her old-fashioned habit. Sometimes she'd just sense her presence, feel that someone else was helping, that she wasn't alone in caring for vulnerable children. Sometimes she'd arrive in a room to find a child already comforted, a blanket already adjusted, as if someone had gotten there first. Emma learned to work in partnership with Sister Margaret. She would speak to her aloud. "Room 307 needs extra watching tonight. That little boy is frightened." And somehow that little boy would sleep more peacefully, would seem less alone. Emma would whisper "thank you" into the quiet ward, and she'd feel a sense of acknowledgement, of shared purpose. One particularly difficult night, Emma was caring for a little girl with cancer, only 7 years old, who was not expected to survive the night. The parents sat vigil, exhausted and heartbroken. Emma did everything she could medically, but she knew it wasn't enough. The child was slipping away. Around midnight, Emma felt Sister Margaret's presence more strongly than ever before. The air in the room grew warm and comforting. The frightened little girl, who'd been restless and in pain, suddenly calmed. Her breathing steadied. Her face relaxed. Emma looked up and saw Sister Margaret clearly, standing on the other side of the bed, her hand resting on the child's head. The old nun was praying quietly, providing the comfort that Emma's medical training couldn't offer. "Is she?" Emma whispered. "Is she going to die?" Sister Margaret looked at Emma with infinite compassion. "Yes. Very soon. But peacefully. Without fear. I'll stay with her. I'll make sure she's not alone when she passes. You tend to the parents. They need you more right now." Emma went to the parents, who were clinging to each other, watching their daughter slip away. She held their hands, offered what comfort words could provide, made sure they knew their daughter wasn't in pain. The little girl died at 2:17 a.m. peacefully, with her parents beside her and Sister Margaret's hand on her head. It was as gentle a passing as Emma had ever witnessed. After the parents had said their goodbyes and left with their grief, Emma returned to the now empty room. Sister Margaret was still there, looking tired in a way that transcended physical exhaustion. "How do you do this?" Emma asked. "How do you care for dying children night after night, decade after decade? How do you not break?" Sister Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "It does break my heart. Every time. For 73 years, every child I couldn't save has broken my heart." She placed her hand over her chest. "But I keep doing it because someone must. Because children should never face pain or death alone. Because even when we can't heal the body, we can comfort the spirit. That's sacred work. That's why I stay." She looked at Emma with those ancient, kind eyes. "You understand this. That's why you do this work. That's why you choose the night shift, the difficult cases, the children who need the most care. You have the calling just as I did. And you'll keep doing it just as I do, because you can't imagine doing anything else." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I can't. Even on the hardest nights, even when children die, even when nothing I do seems enough, I can't imagine being anywhere else." "Then you understand why I'm still here," Sister Margaret said softly. "Why I can't rest. Why I continue making rounds 73 years after my death. This is my purpose. This is my joy. This is where I belong. And I'll stay here as long as children need me. Which is to say, forever." She began to fade. "Thank you for continuing the work. Thank you for caring for them with gentleness. Thank you for understanding that healing isn't just medicine. It's presence, compassion, the willingness to sit with suffering without looking away." And then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of lavender and the warm feeling of a job shared between colleagues who understood each other perfectly. Emma continued working the night shift at St. Catherine's until she retired at age 65. She trained new nurses, passing on Sister Margaret's wisdom, teaching them that pediatric nursing required not just skill but heart. That children needed more than medicine. That presence mattered as much as treatment. Now, in 2024, 73 years after Sister Margaret's death, the night shift nurses on St. Catherine's third floor still experience her presence. Still feel her help on difficult nights. Still glimpse her moving through the ward, checking on children, adjusting blankets, providing the gentle care that has been her eternal calling. The hospital is considering renovations, upgrading the pediatric ward, modernizing the facilities. But the night shift nurses have made one request. Whatever else changes, keep the ward on the third floor. Don't relocate it. Don't redesign it so thoroughly that it becomes unrecognizable. Because Sister Margaret has been making her rounds here for over a century. And the children still need her. Will always need her. Will always need someone who watches through the night, who comforts the frightened, who ensures that no child faces darkness alone. Narrator. And so Sister Margaret O'Brien continues her eternal night watch, moving through the pediatric ward with the same gentle competence she showed in life, ensuring that sick and frightened children never feel alone in the darkness. Like Samuel at his lighthouse, Evelyn in her library, Alexander in his concert hall, Josephine in her bakery, Thomas in his garden, and Harriet in her classroom, Sister Margaret found that her calling, caring for vulnerable children, transcended death itself. The children must be watched over. The frightened must be comforted. The sick must be cared for with compassion. These truths anchor her to the ward she loved, give her purpose beyond life, keep her present in the quiet hours when a child wakes scared and alone. The pediatric ward still operates on the third floor of St. Catherine's Hospital. Children still recover there. Nurses still provide care there. And Sister Margaret still makes her rounds, ensuring that every child knows they are safe, watched over, loved. Rest now, dear listener. Imagine the quiet hospital ward in the deep night, the soft sound of steady breathing, the peaceful atmosphere where healing happens not just through medicine but through presence. Know that somewhere, always, someone is watching, keeping vigil over the vulnerable, refusing to abandon those who need care. Sleep peacefully. The watch continues. All is well. The Watchman's Circle. There is a place where all these stories converge, where the watchers sometimes gather, where those who have remained to continue their sacred work find communion with others like themselves. It is not a place you can find on any map. It exists in the spaces between sleep and waking, between dusk and dawn, between the world of the living and whatever comes after. And once a year, on the longest night of winter, those who keep eternal vigil meet there to share their stories, to remember why they stay, to draw strength from one another for the watch that never ends. Let me tell you about the gathering of gentle ghosts and about the one who calls them together. His name is Daniel Whitmore, no relation to Samuel of the Lighthouse, though the similarity of their surnames has often seemed to him like a meaningful coincidence. Daniel was a night watchman in life, and he remains a watchman still, though his duties have expanded beyond anything he could have imagined when he first took up his lantern over 100 years ago. Daniel Whitmore was born in 1868 in a small coastal town not far from Beacon's End. He grew up hearing the lighthouse horn on foggy nights, grew accustomed to the steady rhythm of the beacon's light sweeping across his bedroom window. That light became a comfort to him, a promise that someone was watching, that even in darkness, there was always someone keeping vigil. When Daniel was 20, he moved to the city to find work. He tried various jobs, factory work, construction, dock loading, but nothing felt right. He was restless during the day, uneasy in crowds, uncomfortable with the noise and bustle of daytime labor. But at night everything changed. At night the city grew quiet. The crowds disappeared. The noise faded. And Daniel found that the nighttime city felt like home in a way the daytime city never did. In 1890 he became a night watchman for a large office building downtown. His job was simple. Walk the building's 7 floors every hour, checking doors, looking for fires or intruders, ensuring that the empty building remained safe through the long hours of darkness. It was work that most people would have found boring, lonely, even unsettling. But Daniel loved it. He loved the quiet. He loved the solitude. He loved the sense of being a guardian, of keeping watch while others slept, of being the one who ensured safety when no one else was awake to worry about it. "Why do you like this work?" the building's owner asked him once. "Don't you find it dull? Frightening?" "No, sir," Daniel replied. "I find it peaceful and important. People need to know that someone is watching, that they're safe while they sleep, that someone cares enough to pay attention when no one else is looking. That's worth doing." For 37 years, Daniel worked as a night watchman. He moved from building to building as needs changed, but the work remained the same. Walking the quiet halls, checking the locked doors, ensuring that all was well while the city slept. He never married. He had few friends, his schedule made socializing difficult. But he didn't mind. He had his work, his purpose, his nightly rounds. That was enough. In 1927, at age 59, Daniel was making his rounds in a warehouse when he discovered a fire starting in the basement. A carelessly discarded cigarette that had smoldered for hours before igniting. He immediately ran to sound the alarm, to wake the night shift workers on the upper floors, to ensure everyone evacuated safely. Everyone got out. The fire department came. The blaze was contained. No one was hurt. But Daniel, in his urgency to warn others, had inhaled too much smoke. His old lungs, weakened by years of breathing in coal dust and city air, couldn't recover. He died 3 days later in the hospital. His final words to the nurse: "Did everyone get out safely? Did I get them all out?" She assured him that yes, everyone had survived. Daniel smiled, closed his eyes and was gone. The company held a funeral. His fellow night watchmen attended, as did some of the workers he'd saved. They honored a man who had spent his life in quiet service, who had died ensuring others' safety, who had been the guardian in the darkness that everyone needed but few appreciated. But Daniel's story didn't end with his death. It merely changed form. 3 nights after his funeral, the new night watchman at the warehouse reported something strange. At exactly 11 o'clock, the time Daniel had always begun his rounds, he heard footsteps on the stairs. Steady, purposeful footsteps ascending from floor to floor. He followed the sound but found no one. Yet the footsteps continued as if someone was making rounds, checking each level, ensuring all was well. At first the new watchman was frightened. But after several nights he began to find the presence comforting. He wasn't alone on his watch. Daniel was still there, still making his rounds, still ensuring the building's safety. This continued for months. Then something remarkable happened. One night, as the phantom footsteps made their rounds, the watchman was walking through the second floor and felt a sudden urgent pull toward the far corner of the building. It wasn't his usual route. Nothing was stored in that corner, no reason to check it. But the feeling was overwhelming, insistent. He followed the pull and discovered a small electrical fire just starting, wires that had been damaged by mice beginning to spark. He extinguished it immediately, preventing what could have been a catastrophic blaze. Later he realized, Daniel had led him there. Had sensed the danger with senses no longer limited by physical existence, and had guided the living watchman to prevent disaster. Word spread among the city's night watchmen about Daniel Whitmore, the guardian who continued his watch even in death. And slowly, other night watchmen began reporting similar experiences. Phantom footsteps in buildings they watched. Urgent feelings drawing them toward problems before they became catastrophes. A sense of being accompanied on their lonely rounds, of being part of a fellowship that transcended death. But Daniel's story expanded beyond this. In the winter of 1928, exactly 1 year after his death, Daniel had an experience that changed everything. He was making his eternal rounds through the warehouse when he felt a pull, different from anything he'd experienced before. Not a pull toward danger, but a pull toward kinship. Toward others like himself. Toward those who had also chosen to remain, to continue their watch, to serve beyond death. He followed the pull through the city, through the spaces between places, until he found himself somewhere else entirely. Not heaven, not earth, but a place that existed in the margins. A quiet clearing surrounded by mist, lit by soft moonlight that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And he was not alone. Standing in the clearing, looking just as surprised as he felt, were others. A lighthouse keeper with sea-colored eyes. A librarian with gentle, serious features. A conductor with a baton still in his translucent hand. A baker with flour dusting her old-fashioned dress. A gardener with dirt under his fingernails. A teacher with chalk on her fingers. A nurse in an old-fashioned habit. They looked at each other with wonder and recognition. They were the same. All of them had remained. All of them had continued their work beyond death. All of them had been keeping vigil, each in their own place, each thinking they were alone in their choice to stay. "I'm Samuel," the lighthouse keeper said finally. "I tend the light at Beacon's End." "Evelyn," the librarian offered. "I care for the Carnegie Memorial Library." One by one they introduced themselves, shared their stories, explained what they watched over and why they'd stayed. And in the sharing they found something precious. Community. Understanding. The knowledge that they were not alone in their eternal vigil. "How did we come to be here?" Alexander the conductor asked. "What is this place?" Daniel, who had felt the initial pull that brought them together, understood intuitively. "We called to each other. Not consciously, but we needed this. We needed to know there were others like us. That we weren't strange or lost or trapped. That we chose this. That it was valid, valuable, meaningful." "But why now?" Josephine the baker asked. "I've been keeping watch for 76 years. Why did we only find each other tonight?" Daniel looked around the circle at these kindred spirits. "Because tonight is the winter solstice. The longest night. The night when darkness is deepest and the need for watchers is greatest. It's the perfect night for guardians to gather. To share their stories. To remember why we watch." And so it became tradition. Once a year on the winter solstice, those who keep eternal vigil gather in that place between places. They share stories of the year past. They speak of those they've watched over, challenges they've faced, small victories and quiet satisfactions. They draw strength from one another for the watch that continues. The circle has grown over the decades. New watchers join as others make the choice to remain, to continue their life's work beyond life. A firefighter who died saving children and now ensures fires are caught early. A crossing guard who protects ghost children and living ones alike. A ship's captain who guides vessels through dangerous waters. A forest ranger who watches over wilderness areas. Each one has their place, their purpose, their reason for staying. And Daniel, who first felt the pull that brought them together, has become their informal leader. The watchman of watchmen, the one who maintains the connection between them, who ensures that no guardian is ever truly alone in their vigil. Emma Chin first learned about the gathering of watchers when she was researching a book on unexplained phenomena. She was a folklorist, fascinated by ghost stories, particularly the ones that didn't fit the typical haunting narrative. Stories of helpful ghosts, protective spirits, benevolent presences. She interviewed night shift workers across multiple cities, collecting accounts of phantom assistance, gentle presences, mysterious help that arrived exactly when needed. The stories were remarkably consistent. Ghosts who watched over specific places, who helped rather than haunted, who seemed devoted to continuing work they'd loved in life. And she kept encountering the same names: Samuel the lighthouse keeper, Evelyn the librarian, Alexander the conductor, Josephine the baker, Thomas the gardener, Harriet the teacher, Margaret the nurse, Daniel the watchman. Emma interviewed people who'd been helped by these ghosts: ship's captains guided by Samuel, students mentored by Harriet, patients comforted by Margaret. She documented case after case of gentle assistance, of watchers keeping their eternal vigil. But what fascinated her most was a pattern she noticed in the timing. Multiple witnesses reported that their helpful ghosts seemed different on winter solstice nights. More present, more visible, more energized. As if something significant happened on that longest night that renewed their purpose. Emma decided to spend a winter solstice night investigating. She visited each place: the lighthouse, the library, the concert hall, the bakery, the garden, the school, the hospital, the old warehouse where Daniel had worked. At each location she found evidence of the watchers' continued presence. But more than that, she felt their absence, as if they were all somewhere else that night, gathered for some purpose she couldn't see. As midnight approached on the solstice, Emma stood in the old warehouse where Daniel Whitmore had died almost a century before. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that she felt drawn to be there on this night in this place. And as the clock struck 12, the air shimmered. The world seemed to thin. And for just a moment, just a single luminous moment, Emma saw through. She saw the clearing in the space between places. Saw the circle of gentle ghosts gathered there, their faces glowing with purpose and fellowship. Saw Samuel and Evelyn and Alexander and Josephine and Thomas and Harriet and Margaret, all standing together sharing their stories of the year past. And at the center, holding a lantern that cast warm light across them all, stood Daniel Whitmore, the watchman. The one who had brought them together and kept them connected across time and space. Daniel looked directly at Emma, through the veil, through the distance, through the barrier between her world and that place between places. He smiled at her with infinite kindness, and though she heard no words, she understood his message clearly. Tell them. Tell the living that we are here. That we watch over what we loved. That death does not end devotion. That there are those who remain to guard, to protect, to ensure that light continues in darkness. Tell them they are not alone. Tell them we keep vigil. The vision faded. Emma stood in the empty warehouse, tears streaming down her face, her heart full of wonder and understanding. She wrote her book. She told the stories of the gentle ghosts, the eternal watchers, the devoted souls who chose to remain. She explained about the gathering, about the fellowship of those who guard, about the winter solstice tradition that renewed their purpose each year. Most readers assumed it was fiction. Beautiful fiction, moving fiction, but fiction nonetheless. They didn't believe in helpful ghosts, in eternal vigils, in love so strong it transcended death. But some readers knew better. The night shift workers. The people who'd been helped by these watchers. The children who'd been comforted, the patients who'd been cared for, the lost who'd been guided home. They read Emma's book and recognized the truth in her stories. They knew. They'd experienced it. And every winter solstice after that, Emma would stand in that warehouse at midnight, hoping to catch another glimpse through the veil. Sometimes she did. Just a flicker. A moment when the worlds grew thin and she could see the watchers gathered in their circle, sharing their stories, drawing strength from fellowship. And always Daniel would notice her. Would nod in acknowledgement. Would send that same wordless message. Thank you for telling our story. Thank you for helping others understand. We continue our watch. We always will. Now, as winter solstice approaches again, the watchers prepare for their annual gathering. Samuel will leave his lighthouse for one night, trusting the automated systems to keep the light burning. Evelyn will step away from her library shelves. Alexander will pause his conducting. Josephine will leave her ovens to cool. Thomas will stop tending his plants. Harriet will step out of her classroom. Margaret will finish her rounds early. And they will come together in that place between places, in that clearing lit by impossible moonlight, to share another year of stories. To celebrate another year of watch kept. To remember why they stay. Because someone must tend the light. Someone must protect the books. Someone must ensure the music continues. Someone must bake the daily bread. Someone must care for growing things. Someone must teach the children. Someone must comfort the sick. Someone must keep watch through the long darkness. These are sacred duties. Worth continuing. Worth staying for. Worth choosing again and again through seasons and years and decades and centuries. The watchers will never leave their posts. They have made their choice and they make it again with each passing year. They are the light in darkness, the help in need, the presence that says, you are not alone. Someone is watching over you. Someone cares. Narrator, speaking more slowly, more gently as if drawing the listener towards sleep. And so the circle continues. The watchers keep their vigil. The gathering happens each winter solstice. And the work goes on, eternal, patient, devoted. You have heard their stories now. Samuel at his lighthouse. Evelyn in her library. Alexander in his concert hall. Josephine in her bakery. Thomas in his garden. Harriet in her classroom. Margaret in her hospital ward. Daniel making his rounds, connecting them all, ensuring no guardian watches alone. They remain because they choose to remain. Because the work they loved in life matters too much to abandon. Because duty and love and purpose are stronger than the boundary between worlds. Because someone must watch. And they have answered that call. Perhaps you will dream of them tonight. Perhaps you will visit that clearing in the space between places, join the circle of watchers for a moment, understand that you too are watched over, cared for, never alone. The lighthouse beam sweeps through darkness. The library doors remain open. The concert hall echoes with eternal music. The bakery ovens warm each morning. The garden blooms in perpetual spring. The classroom welcomes every student. The hospital ward provides comfort through the night. The watchman makes his rounds. And you, dear listener, are safe. Protected. Held in the gentle regard of those who watch. You can rest now. You can sleep. The vigil is being kept. The guard is being maintained. All is well. Sleep peacefully knowing that somewhere always, someone is watching over what they love. Somewhere always light shines in darkness. Somewhere always, there are those who refuse to abandon their sacred duty. The watch continues. The circle holds. The love endures. Rest now. Dream gently. Sleep deeply. The watchers are keeping vigil. You are safe. You are cared for. You're never ever alone.